users respond to provide the best experience possible. And people will have like an anti-consumer or anti-capitalist message about this. They'll say, "Oh, it's horrible that they're showing us things we don't want to see." But let's think about this for a second. The world money makes the world go round, like, right? Like, that's how it is. That's how it's been. That's always how it's always going to be. You can't eliminate money from the human experience. It really doesn't work. We want to exchange things for things, and we want to have units of measurement that we exchange these things for. Granted, we kind of broken the system here in the modern age, but that generally is how it is. We want to have things, and we want to exchange smaller things, a lot of smaller things, in order to obtain those larger things. That's the human experience. That's America. That's definitely America. That's humanity. So you're not getting rid of that anytime soon. That's how people work. So you can negate that from the argument. But the thing is, like, people are anti-advertisement a lot of the time. Like, you see a lot of people who are, "Oh, the advertisements are just the most evil form of marketing, yada yada." Really, they're not. If products never advertised, they probably wouldn't exist. There's so much stuff going on here. It's like, I don't understand why people are anti-advertisement. It just doesn't make any sense to me, because you need these advertisements to sell you products. So you know what to buy, so you know what you want. You need to be told what you want. But also, these products wouldn't exist, and a lot of different ad companies would go out of business. There'd be so many products that wouldn't exist. Television stations would disappear. Radio stations would disappear. The internet would cease to be monetized. That doesn't seem like a very good future. The future is monetized. That is life. That's how it's going to be. The internet is going to be monetized. That's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It is what it is, because that's how life works. Now, you might see good ads. You might see bad ads, but you're going to see ads either way, because the internet companies need to be able to somehow monetize what they do. We monetize our videos on Hot News Talk Radio. So what's it to you that maybe there's a little overlay that says, yeah, by the way, check out whatever internet service on Google? You know, it doesn't really affect our lives that much. I mean, it does, but it's not like the most major inconvenience you can ever have. So I don't know. It's weird how the future is. We need advertisements. It's funny. You see a lot of kids who are like, "Oh, hashtag end capitalism," and they post it on an iPhone. Like, what sense does that make? You know, like, you're talking about political statements and anti-consumerism, anti-capitalism on an iPhone or on an Android phone, or from your laptop, or from a public library. You know, all these things exist because you have capitalism, because you have advertisements. So the argument, it really becomes null. But anyway, that's just how it is. And speaking of, the McDonald's former CEO says that the new $15 per hour minimum wage law could potentially unleash a robotic rebellion. I don't know if that will happen. I think it'd be fun to fight in the robot wars, but nevertheless, for years, economists have been issuing predictions about how automation will impact the world's job markets, but those studies and guesses have yet to make a call based on what would happen if a given sector's wages rose. Instead, that specific guesswork mantle has been taken up by a former McDonald's CEO who declared on Tuesday that a rise in the American minimum wage will set our nation's robotic revolution into motion. Now, that would certainly be interesting to see. I don't know if that will happen, but it would be interesting. In an appearance on Fox Business Mornings with Maria, okay, I've never seen that. Ed Rensi claimed that a minimum wage increase to $15 per hour would result in a job loss like you can't believe, before ceding ground to our new robotic overlords. He says, "I was at the National Restaurant Show yesterday, and if you look at the robotic devices that are coming into the restaurant industry, it's cheaper to buy a $35,000 robotic arm than it is to hire an employee who's inefficient, making $15 an hour bagging French fries." And, it seems like the CEO is kind of right there, honestly. If you can spend $35,000 to get this arm that's always going to do its job properly, that's not going to complain, that doesn't need brakes, that doesn't need anything really, it just needs you to maintain it. It seems like that actually is more efficient than actually hiring real people. Now, is it the individual McDonald's workers' fault that there's a proposal for a $15 an hour minimum wage? Not really, because there are probably McDonald's workers who don't want there to be a $15 minimum wage. I'm sure a lot. So it's not like this is the fault of the teenager who's working there. It's really not, because I know people who work minimum wage and they don't want there to be an increase because they're worried about their jobs going away because of the increase. So it's not like minimum wage is necessarily always being championed by people who are on minimum wage. In fact, a lot of times being championed by people who aren't, oddly enough. but it's still an interesting movement that we might see a capitalistic response to that instead of people, because it's like, well, you pushed far enough, now we're going to replace you with a robot. And there are some jobs that really robots can't do, like personal sort of jobs. You wouldn't want a robot hairdresser, as an example. You really wouldn't want a robot to be perhaps your nanny, right? You wouldn't want a robot to do a lot of janitorial services because they're not going to have the finesse that's required. But still, it's interesting to see how technology is responding to politics. It's a strange future. When pressed, Mr. Renzi admitted that he thinks franchising businesses like fast food restaurants are already hurtling towards automation anyway, saying that those businesses are dependent on people who have low job skills that need to grow. If you can't get people a reasonable wage, you're going to get machines to do the work. It's just common sense. It's going to happen whether you like it or not, he says. He then insisted that an increased minimum wage will make robotic worker adoption just happen faster. So will technology be the response to the calls for a minimum wage increase? You'll have fewer workers who get higher pay. It could be. Or maybe there'll be a law passed that says you can't replace your workers with robots. So who knows? It's all very odd, and it's all very theoretical a lot of the time, because a national $15 minimum wage has never been tried. I don't necessarily think it should be, but it never has been going to happen. Honestly, this should be not even a state issue, because the states don't have the constitutional right to declare a minimum wage. It doesn't work that way. It just simply doesn't work that way. The states are not legally allowed to do that. They do, but it doesn't have any legal basis. So it's a weird future we're walking towards. I don't know. We'll have to see how it works. Speaking of that, Silicon Valley billionaire is wanting to possibly shut down Gawker Media. And I actually don't really have a big problem with that, because Gawker Media, to me, is the worst form of internet journalism. If you're not familiar, they do, well, Gawker, I think Salon is part of that. Jezebel, I believe, is also part of Gawker Media. It's sort of the lowest common denominator of internet journalism. It's not particularly good. It reads like an editorial. It has clickbait headlines like, you won't believe this, that, or whatever. This so-and-so is doing this thing that's really cool. You'll see headlines like that. They're not really like news headlines in the traditional sense. They're clickbait. They're not really news articles. They're just opinion articles disguised as news articles a lot of the time. And one Silicon Valley billionaire reportedly wants to put that to an end. Gawker Media was the company, by the way, that was just recently ordered to pay $140 million in damages to Hulk Hogan, whose real name is apparently Terry Jean Bollea, but who cares about that, back in March of this year. The case was outlandish and caused a media frenzy, as expected, from a legal battle between a man famous for being a professional wrestler and a sort of pseudo-journalistic entity known as Gawker. But now, 2 months after the judge made the decision that not only Gawker Media, but specific employees of the company had to pay Hulk Hogan hundreds of millions of dollars in damages, Gawker founder Nick Denton has indicated that there may have been the shadowy hand of a Silicon Valley billionaire bankrolling the case, perhaps one with a grudge against Gawker Media. That person, he suggested, none other than PayPal co-founder Peter Thiel. Now, both the New York Times and Forbes claim that Denton is right, that a billionaire investor, Thiel, has been secretly paying for Hogan's legal fees. Now, does that change the case's outcome? Probably not, because who cares who's paying your legal fees? The evidence remains the same no matter who's bankrolling the legal court case. Maybe. The lawyers would be different, maybe, but it's not like this makes an enormous difference in the outcome of the case, possibly. Is this a last-ditch effort on the side of the Gawker CEOs to maybe change the case's outcome? Possibly. Now, Forbes has offered no evidence that Thiel is behind it, and there's a fully legal practice called third-party litigation funding, so he really could do that, and it's fine. But a few hours later, the New York Times reported the same thing, saying they talked to somebody who was briefed on the arrangement. So the New York Times says the terms of that arrangement are protected by a confidentiality agreement. Now, do you believe New York Times? I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't put much faith in a lot of different journalistic entities just because I want to see the evidence for myself a lot of the time. I don't want to go based on a very fallible human who could have written something wrong. And anyone can do that. I've done that. Anyone can do that. That's why you have retractions. Nobody sees the retractions, but you do have them. So that's just life. That's just journalism. Back in March, Nick Denton said the idea that a third party be privately funding the Hogan case for their own agenda as rather conspiracy theory-like, but the Gawker founder has changed his mind in recent weeks. So who knows? Could it be one of the largest internet journalistic, pseudo-journalistic entities going down because of a lawsuit by Hulk Hogan could be the result of a billionaire in Silicon Valley funding it? It sounds like a comic book, never mind real life. It sounds like something that you'd read in a DC comic. Actually, more likely a Marvel comic. It sounds like something you read in like a Dark Horse plot. It's just weird. But that's real life. Real life is stranger than fiction. They often say nonfiction is more often than not stranger than fiction. So that's weird. I don't know. Colin Cowherd coming up next here on Hot News Talk Radio. The future is wild. It's weird. And whether you like it or not, it is how it is. Oh, well.